We live in strange times. Most of us now live in urban environments and we've become completely disconnected from our food. Even the types of things we call food has changed drastically in recent history. It is highly doubtful that someone 200 years ago would recognize some of the ultra-processed, colorfully packaged substances we call food. For most of human existence, we've eaten plants and animals and had an intimate connection with our food. Today, we shop in clean, well-lit grocery stores where our food is neatly processed, packaged, and labeled. And most of us have never seen the foods we eat in their original states, let alone raised, tended, harvested, and processed it. We've wholesale outsourced our food supply to big business, factory farms, and industrial-scale agriculture. And this is taking a toll on our health and well-being. Hello and welcome to the Over 50 Health and Wellness Show. I'm your host, Kevin English. I'm the founder of The Silver Edge, and our mission is to help you get into the best shape of your life, no matter your age, so you can show up in the second half of your life as the healthiest, strongest, most vital version of yourself. We have a great show for you today. Tyler Dawley is here, and he's going to talk to us about the future of farming. But before we get to that, I want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by Ned. Ned makes the world's best natural remedies. They're probably best known for their line of full-spectrum CBD products, which are beyond organic. Their hemp is biodynamically grown just for them. With the wild rise in the popularity of CBD products these days, there are tons of options out there. But if you want to be 100% sure that you're getting the finest available CBD, definitely check these guys out. Now, that being said, I am also madly in love with their magnesium product. It's called Mellow, and it helps me de-stress, and it optimizes my sleep, and it's a part of my pre-bed routine every single night. Anyway, if you're interested in learning more, head over to silveredgepartners.com and click on the Ned icon. And because you're a listener of this show, you can save 15% off your first order when you use the coupon code SILVEREDGE at checkout. That's silveredgepartners.com, and the coupon code is SILVEREDGE, all run together, no spaces. Okay, enough of that. Let's get on with today's show. My guest today is Tyler Dawley. Tyler is part of a new vanguard of farmers who are rethinking old paradigms. His generation of small farmers and ranchers are questioning and reimagining the family farm traditions and implementing regenerative farming practices, not just because it's better for the earth and the livestock, but because it allows them to also compete with the industrial food machine on their own terms. Tyler's family have lived on the Big Bluff Ranch for 6 decades. That's 4 generations now. So join us today as Tyler shares what it's like to be a rancher raising everything from grass-fed beef to pasture poultry. Without further ado, let's meet Tyler.
To be fair, I probably won a little bit of the genetic lottery in that I was actually born here. The getting into ranching and farming these days is, there's some saying along the lines of either you inherit it or you marry it. And luckily, I got to inherit it. So Grandpa, my mom's dad, bought the ranch in 1960. My parents moved up here permanently in 76. And then in the 80s, Grandpa kind of transferred management over to my parents, and they kind of realized, how are we going to make money at this ranching thing? So they started casting about. They weren't born and bred on the ranch. They were city people. My dad grew up sailing in Santa Barbara, and my mom, she doesn't believe this, but I like to say she was a hippie in Berkeley, but she really wasn't. Anyways, they got up here to the ranch in the 80s, and they're like, well, we love the place. We're addicted to being ranchers, but we don't have generations of knowledge. So how are we going to make money at this? So they went just casting about, and they came across a guy named Alan Savory in the early 80s, and he's a minor celebrity now. Depends on which world you talk to. Some people know a lot about him, some people don't, but He is a African, geez, I don't even know how to describe him, botanist. He's kind of come up with this whole philosophy on how to manage the landscape. And simply, very simply put, he was in Africa. He realized, hey, there's these big herds of wildebeest. They're here for a day and then they're gone for 6 months and then they come back for a day. And so he took that idea and extrapolated it to a range management philosophy where how domesticated animals can replicate wild behavior. And so, in short, humans become the predators, the managers of these livestock. And so, the things we do is we set up fences to control access for animals to various pastures. So, basically, high density, short duration grazing. So, boom, they're here for a day, eat it down, and then they're gone and you let these plants recover. So that's my parents got way into that and I could go on for a long time about that. But then so that was the 80s. 90s kind of led us into looking into our cattle genetics that a lot of conventional beef is bred to do well in a feedlot, which without getting too technical means they're tall and skinny and you can eat a lot of corn before they get too fat. Um, but that cow doesn't do well out here on the range. And so we changed our cattle genetics to short, wide cows, which means they get fat pretty easily. They finish well. And so by around 2000, when I graduated college, it was like, oh, hey, this is the beginning of the grass fed beef boom. So the joke story goes that I graduated on a Friday and I was at a farmer market by Sunday. It was actually about a month later, but why let the truth get in the way of a story?
Right.
So yeah, 2000s were farmers markets. So we were kind of first movers in Northern California where we're at. So we were at our local farmers market selling beef, doing all right, but it was early. People were not used to buying beef when they thought they were buying veggies. So we cast about. We did some lamb, loved goat, great animals to raise, but not a huge market for it. More people started showing up with grass-fed beef. We're like, oh, we got to try something else. So we tried chicken, and it it was not a good first experience for us. We did it pretty much as bad as possible, and so we came up with the rule: no four legs only, no two-legged animals, four legs only. And then we're like, okay, well, the only other four legged animal that we haven't done yet is pork. So we started doing some pasture raised pork, and we quickly realized that pork for us was way more difficult than chicken. So we got out of that. So we were like, okay, now no pork. There's a whole bunch of other beef people. There's a whole bunch of there are other lamb and goat people, but no one's really buying anything. The only opportunity for us was chicken. So we got back into chicken. So we were processing on farm under USDA exemption, which is a lot of people do that. And we reached a point where we had to decide whether or not we were going to go USDA on farm inspection or something else. And I ran into a guy at a conference as happens, and he could raise more, or he could sell more than he could raise, and we could raise more than we could sell. And so that was the turning point for us where we started being contract growers. We were growing lots of chicken for other people with their label on it, but we were the ones doing it. And we were the only ones in California growing, still are really the only ones in California growing pasture poultry at scale, which is a little bit of a joke because we're, what's smaller than nano? Like we're tiny. What we raise in a year, the smallest big guy does in a day of processing. Like, yeah, we're pretty big for pasture poultry, but we're not even a rounding error to the big guys. We're just nothing. So we did that was 2009. We started doing the poultry. 2011 we started contract growing. And through various twists and turns of COVID, we are now direct marketing to the consumer. We've got ourselves a website, and people go on there and buy it, and boom, it shows up at their door. So that is a long, winding story of how I am standing here talking to you.
Standing here talking to me, that's right, about being a poultry farmer. Now, when you say you're a small micro or nano grower, just to give folks some sort of a scale here, how many birds are we talking about on your ranch today,
So for
roughly?
us, we are going to grow out about 50-ish thousand birds this year. And kind of at full tilt, we can do about 72,000 birds a year. And that's putting us at, 1,000, 1,500 head a week on average. And that, most pasture poultry producers are, less than 10,000 a year because that's the USDA exemption. It changes per state, but basically, let's just say I'm right and say anything under 10,000 birds a year you can do without USDA inspection. Anything over 10,000 birds a year, you have to get USDA inspected, but it changes per state. So, anyways, at that, putting us in perspective that way, we're rather large. We're, 5, 6, 7 times larger than an average pasture poultry producer. But compared to, foster farms out in our side of the world, that's, yeah, they process that in a day.
Yeah, I think that people might be surprised when they hear those numbers because a lot of us don't stop and think about our food, where our food comes from, right? Most of us shop, frankly, in grocery stores, and all of our meat and produce it's all picked and processed and nice and neat and tidy and sold in little parcels for us. But if you stop and think, just even in one grocery store in one community, how many chickens it would take to feed that, to stock up those shelves in a week, you quickly start, and then you do the math. Okay, well, there's how many grocery stores in my community, and then how many in my state, and how many in the United States. That's a lot of birds. So I want to talk to you. You've mentioned several times pasture raised. You're doing pasture raised poultry. What does that mean?
Oh,
What is pasture raised?
so conventional chicken is raised in what they would call a barn. So basically, you're talking about a football field sized barn with, depending on the size and all that sort of stuff, but you're talking probably 30, 40, 50,000 birds per building. You'll see them driving, well, not always, but you can see them driving down the road. They're going to be these really long buildings and they're going to have these huge fans on the end. And that is, they basically have to exhaust all of the respiration from the birds, all of the everything. So they've got these huge fans, and that's how 99 point, let's call it, be generous, let's say it's 99.2% of all chicken in the US is raised. We'll give pasture poultry 0.8% of the market. I think that's way generous, but why not? So pasture poultry, it's pretty much the opposite of that. Rather than raising our birds in barns, we're actually having our chickens out on pasture. So that means we're putting them on a fresh pasture. They're getting to eat bugs. They're getting to eat grass. They're out in the sun. They're, taking dust baths. They're living the way a chicken should live. And so there's kind of a couple schools of thought about how to do pasture poultry, but generally speaking, in all situations, that's birds on pasture for a little bit of time, moved off that spot. That pasture gets to recover, and then birds come back to it at a later point. So it's the blending of what we need for a society to feed ourselves, and it's also allowing the bird to be a bird. So that's how we kind of mesh those two needs. The confinement guys they're just all about cranking out protein, right? That's just protein. There's not really any as much emphasis on animal welfare as what we think we give. They do a great job. We can't produce chicken that cheap, but I probably could be better. I don't want to
Yeah.
poke too many fingers that way.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a lot in here I want to pull apart. So I was actually raised on a beef cattle farm, and we did have meat chickens and egg chickens. And I'm on a small farm today. I've got I've got 24, 23, 24 chickens. So not quite 30, 50,000 chickens, but I got a couple. But I've actually been in some of these poultry barns, and if you've ever been inside one, it's alarming, maybe upsetting, depending on your background, because these, like you said, these things are mass producing protein. They're mass producing meat. It's what some of our listeners may refer to as factory farming, and there's probably degrees of that. But these people are just getting as dense per square foot, as many birds as they can grow in this, like you said, these big football field size buildings. They're just packed with these full grown birds. And I suppose there's a science to turning this over, right? These birds, how old are these birds from birth to processing typically in some of these big, more commercial outfits?
So
It's pretty quick these days, isn't it?
it's crazy quick. So it depends a little bit on the ultimate use for the bird. Some of them can get to harvest weight by 35 days, more of them around
Wow.
42 days. So
42 days.
it's,
Yeah.
so what, 7 weeks, 6 weeks, just crank them out.
And that's all economically driven, right? The more I can turn these birds, the faster I can turn them, the more profit I'll make,
Right.
the more money I'll
Yep.
make. Yeah.
Yep.
Now, how does that compare to pasture raised? Do they have a similar lifespan there,
So
or?
so 99.9% of all chicken you're going to eat is comes from a breed called a Cornish cross, which is just it's the meat bird. If you're at farmers markets, you might find some heritage breeds. There are some other ones out there, but 90%, 99% of them are going to be Cornish cross. And so even pasture poultry guys, for the most part, are going to raise Cornish cross. So there are issues with Cornish cross that they have been bred. They're not genetically modified. There's people out there talking about that. They're not genetically modified. They've just been bred very, very carefully for a long time to grow really fast.
Yeah,
So fast
and
growth
big.
does create some structural problems in the birds. Basically, their muscles grow faster than their organs. So, the conventional guy, there's a lot of bashing on conventional guys, but ultimately only a healthy, happy bird or animal of any sort grows well. So no one out there is out there trying to purposely maliciously treat animals. Every single animal person is trying to take care of them the absolute best they can. But that being said, if you're growing these birds in barns up to harvest weight in 42 days, like, you're definitely pushing the limits of their genetic capability, and you will come across some genetic flaws or flaws in the genetics. So yeah, they grow too fast. So but we get the exact same genetics here at the ranch. I actually call them conventional barn rescues, orphans. We rescue them. And so we raise our birds depending on orders and sizes. We're at about a 53-day grow out. So we're looking at an extra 10 days, I guess that is 10 days, 2 weeks of grow out. And, that doesn't sound like a very large amount of time, but if you do the math on the percentage, that's a pretty significant more lifespan on a percentage basis for those birds. So what that means is that we are getting to the same harvest weight, but we're taking an extra 10 days to get there. So that means they're growing slower. That means the muscles are growing more in line with the organ development. So all of the issues that you have with growing too fast, we don't. And the reason they're not growing fast is that they're actually, doing something besides sitting and eating. They're out there, they're running around, they're chasing bugs, they're having little chicken fights, and they're living, they're moving. And all of that stuff ends up showing up in the flavor of the bird, the texture of the bird. So age equals flavor. So that's good for your listeners, right? Anyone over 50, like, you got a lot of flavor going on.
Right.
But in chicken, that's going to work out too. So they're going to work out. You're going to have more flavor. They're going to be older. They'll have done more work. So you're going to have a denser flesh. You're going to have more flavor. Like, the stock you can make from our bones is just, it's ridiculous. It's so yummy. So anyways, age equals flavor. So growing those birds a little bit longer just makes a better life for the chickens, and it makes a better
Yeah.
chicken for you to eat.
Okay, fantastic. So just a couple of questions here, and then I want to talk about a little bit of vocabulary. But so just going back to this operation here. So you've got these birds, and we're rotating pastures,
Right.
right? And at night, are they coming inside? Are they just left out, or how do you do that?
Yeah.
How do you
So
handle
the
that?
way we raise our birds, we're kind of in the school of thought of what they would call day range. So we have a a hoop house where that's their house, their barn for their whole life. And so we open up the doors in the morning and they run around, they do whatever they want
Yeah.
to do. And then, so many sayings came out of agriculture. So, your chickens come home to roost. Like, if you're, spreading
Mm-hmm.
rumors and, you get caught out, your chickens come home to roost. That is exactly true. If you got your own chickens in the
Yeah,
backyard, you know the deal. Like they are
that's
clockwork.
right.
The sun goes down, they are
They
on
are.
their roost
Sun goes down, they put themselves to bed.
every
Yeah,
single night.
100%.
So our birds are trained like that. So we open them up in the morning, they go off, they do the chicken thing, and then sun goes down, birds go to bed, close them up, and they're all protected for the night. And then we have livestock guardian dogs that are out there protecting the chickens. We have electric fence. We have multiple layers of defense. But yeah, basically it's just putting them to bed at night.
Yeah, and like you said, they put themselves to bed, right?
Yeah,
All you got to do is go shut up after them.
right.
Fantastic. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about some of the vocabulary that we as consumers see all the time. And the first is, we've talked a lot about pasture raised. That seems that marketers are getting pretty savvy, because I see that on a lot of different meat these days. What does pasture raised mean in that context?
Pasture raised means whatever you want it to mean.
See, that's what I was afraid you were going to say. So, yeah, I think is that more of a marketing term?
It
I mean,
is.
if you put pasture raised on your meat, is the pasture raised police coming to check up on you?
Nope.
to
Nope.
make sure that they're pasture raised?
Nope. So I will get some of the specifics wrong here, but in general, I'd be right that the USDA, the FSIS Food Safety Inspection Service, has a list of terms that are approved to go on labels, and that these are third-party audited terms. For instance, natural is a defined term. Organic is a defined term. I think free range is a defined term. And so, under those definitions, you have to meet certain criteria. You send off an affidavit to DC, and then they say, okay, Joe Schmo's farm, you're good to go to call yourself free range. But then there are a bazillion other terms that you can add to your label, pasture raised being one of them, family farm, I don't know, just on and on and on and on and on. And so you have to put in an affidavit for each term you put on your label. So that at least has some paperwork behind it. But any of your marketing stuff, there's no police there. So pasture raised means raising birds on pasture, but the only way to really verify it is to know your farmer, because it's relatively
Right.
easy to kind of work around those descriptions if you're a smart marketing person.
Right, right. Understood. Now, you had mentioned free range. That's another one we see all the time. I see it on meat. I see it on eggs now. That is, in fact, a term that has, I guess, some sort of teeth to it. Is that right?
Yes.
How is that enforced or defined?
The definition, I would get the specifics wrong, but basically they're going to have a description of access to the outside. So for instance, mostly you see these being applied these days to free range eggs, free range chicken eggs. At least that's where I see them. And in the egg world, they're
Mm-hmm.
going to talk about the width of the door to the number of birds, so the birds can get outside. And then they will also talk about square footage allowed to birds. So, I think it's like 10 square feet maybe. So that is the definition of free range. But I don't know if you've kind of already figured out that it's a very mechanical definition. It's like you put a door into a barn, now they're free range. It does not encompass any sort of pasture health. It does not encompass any sort of animal health, animal access. It's just really just, hey, we have doors, they can go outside. And, honestly, that birds are creatures of habits, and that there are some bylaws and strictures in there about when you have to open the doors and when you have to close them, that generally these birds don't have access to these doors until they're so old that their habits are set and they're like, it's scary out there, I'm not going out there, and they live
Yeah.
inside. So free range is better than no range, but it's not this like bucolic farm, old McDonald's farm type idea where there's two chickens out on green grass. It's a big barn that we talked about with some doors on the side. It's
Yeah, and I
more than
think
that,
that
but
you probably you hit the nail on the head. I think a lot of us, when we read these marketing terms, we have this idyllic scenario in our mind. These animals that are out and they're happy and they're free range, right?
right.
They're doing their own thing. But oftentimes, I think that that's not certainly the case. That's more marketing than it is actual reality. So, Tyler, I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about. So we've talked about this idea of regenerative agriculture, regenerative farming. And I guess before we get into the next piece of this, just for those of us out there that maybe have heard that term but aren't really sure what it means, I think we have an idea. Now that you're talking about, we're going to do this pasture rotation, we're trying to mimic these wild ecosystems. What is regenerative farming or regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, I think you pretty well bundled it all up. I mean, it's still a new term. There's not a set definition out there, so it's a little bit of choose your own adventure. But I would certainly say that it encompasses exactly what you talked about. That using farming practices to revitalize the landscape, to which then grows really healthy animals, which then provides really healthy food for us. It's a very synergistic, positive feedback system. So you're definitely, if you're really in regenerative agriculture, you're thinking about all the way down to your soil microbes, like that you're really literally building from the ground up. Like, how can I make my soil healthy? What does a healthy soil look like? And then how do I do that? And then there's all sorts of different ways of doing it. I talked a little bit earlier about, grazing our animals like the wildebeest of Africa. That is one way of doing it on an extensive landscape if you're kind of an animal person. If you're a row cropper in the Midwest, you're thinking a lot of stuff about cover crops and green leaf as many months out of the year as you can, no till farming, don't disturb your soil. If you're a, farmer market type person, you're thinking a lot of the same things. You're like, working by hand. I'm trying to incorporate some animals into my backyard garden. Like, if you've got your 24 hens on the backyard, you got a garden, like, don't keep those separate. Figure out some way of layering them on top of each other. Do some sort of yearly rotation. That Mother Nature never farms in a vacuum and never farms without animals. So that's what regenerative agriculture is really taking as many lessons we can from Mother Nature, putting them together, and then figuring out how we can take that knowledge and apply it to what we need as a society. So the cool thing about Mother Nature is that she works very, very well with no direct intervention, in that she doesn't have to go out there and move the cows to the next pasture, right? It just the wolves come in and move the wildebeest or the bison. I got to get my continent straight here. But what we can do as humans, we can step in, and if we can understand the systems that she is using and why they are effective in what they're doing, we can add in our direct involved management. So rather than having those wolves move the bison kind of somewhat randomly, we can be like, oh, those bison need to be moved because that grass is grown down. Okay, we'll move them now at the exact right time because we're paying attention to this that Mother Nature couldn't do. And then the bison are gone. But in this case, now the bison aren't bison. Now they're cattle. Now we're running cows. So we're like, oh, this grass is growing back too slow. We can't come back here. Oh, now the grass is perfect. Let's put the cows on here right now. And so what we're able to do with human intervention is to actively push these Mother Nature processes forward faster. So the things that takes Mother Nature with not a benevolent dictatorship, but like hands-off management, you know, she'll take her 100 years to make an inch of topsoil. If we're actively managing things, we can make an inch of topsoil in 10 years, right? So that's this big ball of regenerative stuff that's still evolving now, but it really comes down to taking Mother Nature's processes, understanding them, and then reflecting them back onto the landscape in a way that our society needs. Something like
Yeah, as you're saying that, it seems to me that you're creating you're not create well, you are. You're creating this positive feedback loop where you have animals that are fertilizing your soil. Let's stay with the cattle, right? Their hooves are naturally scuffing up the soil. They're leaving they're pooping and they're fertilizing as they go. They graze that down under your care and management and stewardship. Then you're going to say, okay, it's now is the time we move them over to this other pasture. And if we look at, those folks that are growing our vegetables, those folks aren't monocropping, which is most people when they go to Whole Foods and they buy their whatever, their organic vegetables, that's coming from a farm in Central California, or maybe not even on the continent, where they're just doing this very large scale monocropping type operation, as opposed to what you're talking about, right? This caring for the land, having the stewardship and ownership of the land, this love, I think, maybe, and connection to the land that is missed in just an economic operation. Is that fair?
Yeah. I mean, I there is something absolutely true. I'm going to pick out one thing of what you said about the connection to the land, that every agriculturalist that I've ever known is just, we're nuts. Like, this is like the dumbest way to make a living. Like, there's no money in
Yeah.
agriculture. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But that every single agriculturalist you're going to talk to is all about taking care of the land as best they know how. Everything is about like preserving it for the next generation. Everything is just about the land, and it's just it I don't know. I don't. There's something very almost mystical about it if you want to take it to that route. But this ranch that's been in our family since 1960, that hopefully my kids and nieces and nephews are going to inherit. Well, they will inherit, and hopefully they take up the mantle and keep it going. They're all short. It's tough to say if it's going to happen yet, but it gets under your skin. Like, I can't really conceive of anything else that I want to do in my life. It's just, this is everything. It encompasses my intellect, it encompasses my physicality, it encompasses like being able to go out there and do something and like be able to look out there and be like, I did that. And the cool thing is I can actually look back at stuff I did when I was 10 years ago, 20 years ago. I've been in here a long stinking time, by the way. It makes me feel old.
Yeah.
I can look back at what my grandfather did. My kids are now being raised on this ranch. I am taking them to the exact same spot in the creek to do the exact same games I did at that exact same age in that exact same spot. I remember exactly how fun it is to build a rock dam. I remember exactly how fun it is to shoot a BB gun
Hmm.
into the creek. It is mind blowing, and it is so, I don't know. It is just so overwhelming. There is nothing else for me. I mean, yeah, I could do something else, but no, I'm not going to. So I don't know what your real full question was, but there is just, I wanted to just speak to that real quick, that anyone who you meet who's on the land is going to be nuts. So there's something wrong in the best way in their head if they're an agriculturist.
Yeah, right. Yeah, yeah. You're not in it for the money. Clearly, there are a few vocations that are there. People are called, or it's a passion project. People aren't getting in it because there's a lot of money to be made, and certainly regenerative farming, I think, or any real agricultural pursuit in this day and age, probably not. I suppose some of those really big operations are probably big money deals, but I want to, as you're saying this, there may be people out there thinking, okay, you're talking about this passion and this love for the land and these animals that you're caring for, but you're going to kill them all. Talk to us a little bit about that dichotomy, right? As a kid, I grew up, we didn't have enough chickens that we sent, the beef it went to a processing plant. I processed the chickens. So I learned early on that there's this strange relationship between loving and caring for animals and then understanding that they're food and that they provide sustenance. And there's, as I've grown a little older, there's now a sacredness or spiritual element to that. But I'd love to hear you talk about your relationship to your animals and kind of help people understand how you can be saying, hey, I love my animals. I love this farm. I love what I'm doing. It's multi-generational, but yet you're a killer, right?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It is a dichotomy. And every now and then I smack my head up against it. I'm like, what am I doing? What am I doing here? So I don't know what my answer is really, or I guess I can tell you what my answer is. And I don't know if
Sure.
it's the answer or if it even makes sense to anyone else, but it works for me. And it basically just, I live with that dichotomy. Somehow there's a split in my brain where for 99% of their life I am all about taking care of them, taking care of their land, taking care of just doing everything absolutely I can for them because I know that they deserve it. And then at some point, there's a little flip that switches in my head, or flip that switches in my head. And it's like, no, okay, now it's time for you to be food. That now it is time for the next stage in your life. And so it's there. I mean, I fully understand the cycle of life that, they're going to die eventually, anyways. I mean, that's just a little brutal. I don't know if we want to go down that route, but look, they're going to die, and at some point, they're going to be food for someone else. That's going to be the case for us. We're all going to die, and we're all going to be food for someone else at some point. So if I am not taking care of those animals, that means, they're not being taken care of. And so to some degree, you could say that their trade off is like, hey, we are going to let this crazy two-legged thing take care of us, and that the tithe that we have to give to them is a little bit of our flesh. They're not going to eat all of us, but they'll take care of all of us, but they need to eat one. you know and I don't have a great answer, but there is something like that. I think Michael Pollan wrote the book. It was Botany of Desire. I think he talked about it in there, where there is this thought process where DNA wants to replicate itself, and that these domesticated animals, now they're domesticated, at the time that they first became domesticated, realized that, hey, by giving up a little bit of myself to this two-legged person, he's going to take my genetics and spread it everywhere. But you could see that what the trade-off would be, that like, okay, I'm willing to give myself into these person's care. It's going to cost me a little bit, but they're going to spread me everywhere. And that, I think the example that I remember was apples. The apples actually came from Central Asia, and now apples are in, 6 continents in the world. So yeah, I don't know. It's a dichotomy. Everyone's food for everyone else. So take care of what you can, the best you can, and go from there. I don't know. Did that make
Yeah, and
sense?
I wasn't.
Did I have it even?
It does. It absolutely. It certainly makes sense to me. But I think that people, you and I, before we started recording, we're talking about a lot of people. We've lost this connection to our food, right? Most people encounter food in a supermarket where it is neatly processed and packaged and portioned out, and we don't have that. We don't see what the life of an animal from birth through death and processing, etc. Most of us don't have that experience, but there is that kind of, I'm 100% with you. There's that dichotomy of where I'm a caretaker and I love these animals, but I know what this cycle is, right? And the return for me caring and feeding and protecting these animals up to this point in their life that's the price, right? And like you said, it's hard to it's hard to verbalize. Obviously, it's hard to explain, and maybe that's because there isn't an explanation. But nature in itself, by itself, is this perfect system, and everything is food for something else, right? Especially we take birds, right? Those birds by themselves, they're going to be prey for something else if they're wild birds, and not all of them are going to get to live to that 50-day mark or whatever that is. So from here, this might be a good place to springboard into where I wanted to go next, and that is a little bit political here. So we are seeing a tremendous flood of information about plant-based alternatives. There's the Beyond Meat, there's this big kind of plant-based and vegan movements, and we're being marketed and sold these products as as a healthier alternative to meat, and B, as being more environmentally sound or more environmentally friendly. What are your thoughts on that?
Wow, you're just throwing me off into the sharks, right?
Let's get into it, man.
Yeah, I think in general, plant-based meat substitutes are kind of stupid. I don't know, I don't. I'm not going to have the.
Look, hey, I'm a nutrition coach. Let me jump in here, and I will say I'm 100% with you.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. I feel supported.
Yep.
I appreciate it.
You're supported, right? Yeah, my vegan friends out there probably not so much, but yeah, let's continue. So,
well, vegan.
Plant-
I mean, I personally eat meat. Obviously, I'm not opposed to vegans. I understand where they're coming from, and I don't. I think they're a little misguided, but I totally understand where they're coming from. Don't. But that is, if you take a vegan route where you're really going with whole foods and really kind of live, eating right off of the land as best you can. I think where I start having questions is when you take those raw ingredients and then they get processed and change dramatically from where they are. And then so now you're losing nutrients in the food, which a nutritionist would know way more than I would. But you're also incurring a whole bunch of other costs. Like you're thinking about you have this gigantic factory, you have the employees, who knows how how their workplace environments are. Now you're talking about shipping a degraded natural product, who knows how many hundreds or thousands of miles. Now you're freezing things, you're packaging them, you have so much more packaging. So I have seen smart people talk about kind of the food efficiency. That's not the right term, but how many calories in to how many calories out for these sort of meat-based or plant-based meat substitutes. And I've never seen anything that seems to make sense to me. It's like you're taking all the water. It doesn't make sense. You're trying to take something that should be a plant and turn it into a meat. Why not just eat meat? Because I think I do see where they're coming from. That if you look at, like, say, a conventional corn grain finished beef, like there's a fair amount of probably environmental dissonance there, where it doesn't really make sense to grow corn in the Midwest, ship it out to California in this case, feed it into a cow, ship the cow back to Nebraska to get slaughtered, ship the meat back to California in a plastic package to get eaten. That doesn't make sense. But if you're talking about a grass-fed beef, like that cow, that grass-fed steer is like sunlight, rain, grass. It just maybe I'm too deep in the weeds on this, but I don't see how anyone could deny the natural perfectness of cow grass water. Just like why. And it tastes good too. I mean, there's some awesome vegan food. Don't get me wrong. I like some vegan dishes, but generally speaking, meat's better.
Yeah, 100% with you. I mean, nutritionally, what's happening is we're being sold these very ultra processed plant, quote unquote, plant based foods, which very often are very high in processed oils and salt, fats, flour, things like that, sugar, certainly. And these are by no means healthy or alternatives. And the other way it's being marketed, of course, is, oh, it's environmentally friendly because everybody knows that cow farts are ruining the atmosphere. And I think that, like you said, there's a lot to be considered, and it's not as black and white as some people would try to market this to us. So that brings me very nicely to my next question, and I honestly I have no idea what the answer to this is, but I'm very curious. Can we all? I mean, there's a bunch of us on the planet now. Can we all eat regenerative grass-fed meat? This kind of what you're doing. I mean, is this scalable, is what I guess I'm saying, for our population where we are today? Or is really more this monocropping and factory farming, is that, and maybe concocting foods in a lab, is that more the way that we're going to have to go as we grow as a population?
That is a big question, dude. Let's see if I can even encompass part of a reasonable answer. So I would say yes, regenerative meats and regenerative agriculture could feed the world. I mean, that's always kind of something thrown around, like, oh, you can't feed the world with that. Well, you probably couldn't feed the world the current Western diet with the current, the food pyramid, like, the grains at the bottom,
Mm-hmm.
like that food pyramid probably does not work in a regenerative agriculture world, because that food pyramid is a man-made, man-constructed, USDA approved, government-funded food pyramid. So just to give you some gut feeling of what's going on, that there used to be more bison in the Midwest than there are cattle on the entire US or something like that. So
I've
there
certainly
used to
heard that
be
before. Yeah.
lots and lots and lots and lots and lots of bisons, way more bison than there are cattle now. And their farts didn't ruin the world. But there was also basically no corn back then. You had a tiny amount of corn. So, and there wasn't a lot of chicken. Like, you were going off and hunting your chukkas and your pheasants and your quail and maybe a turkey every now and then when they finally came up from wherever they came from, South America. So just on kind of like a gut feeling level, if you kind of look back to what Mother Nature was providing and what early agriculture looked like before the advent of the agricultural revolution, kind of around World War II, that we were feeding a lot of people. Like we were feeding a lot of people well. Now you're going to say, oh, the population's so much bigger, and it absolutely is. But we were not actively, intelligently managing our agriculture back then. We were still definitely in kind of the extraction mode because we could afford to. Like we were just like, oh, whatever. If this field's all played out, I'm just going to go to the next field and extract all the nutrients from there, and I extract that. And then eventually, 100 years later, I come back to this feeling like, oh, it's like kind of naturally recovered. So that was, inefficient and wasteful, but it didn't need to be any better than that. Now we know so much more. So that one field that we're farming or whatever, we have tools at hand to both pull nutrients out of that and to put human nutrients out and to put soil nutrients back in all at the same time. So the advances in agricultural practices, this whole regenerative movement. I mean, I don't have the exact numbers, but I know from because I'm a fanboy of some of these guys back in the Midwest doing the farming. It's like it's incredible. Just they outproduce conventional farming just by factors of 10. Like it's just not even a joke. If anyone wants to go down the rabbit hole, Gabe Brown is the current banner bearer of regenerative agriculture. He's in South Dakota, and he is on YouTube and he gives talks, and he's just, you want to get excited about the future, listen to Gabe Brown. Like that guy will get you. And he'll say way more eloquently with probably more numbers and prove to you that regenerative agriculture is not only capable of feeding the future population, but it is the only thing possible. Conventional farming has got some fatal flaws to it, and it it's collapsing under its own weight, and it's not going to last forever.
Yeah, that's very interesting to me, and is it seems to me that there's this a bit of a swell, groundswell for regenerative agriculture. I think more and more people are hearing this. There's the permaculture movement, the regenerative agricultural movement. Is this a growing thing? Are younger people moving back to the land? Is this something that's growing legs and moving forward and growing, do you think?
I think it is. I mean, so remember how I said I won the genetic lottery? I was born here. So as far as young people coming back to agriculture, that is a hard row to hoe to find land to get into agriculture, just kind of on the functional side of things. And then it's not even talking about the cultural side of things that, there is, call it oral history. There are decades, generations of like knowledge that gets transferred down from grandfather to father to son. Not all of that's good stuff, but there is so much unwritten knowledge in that sort of history that if you come into farming without that sort of background, like that's already, you can do it. Many people have, but you're definitely starting off kind of a little bit, on the back foot there without just like all this stuff kind of just propelling you forward, all this knowledge and experience and passion and access. And so getting started in agriculture is not easy, but there's certainly people are doing it, and they're doing it well, so they can absolutely do it. I think the thing that's actually more exciting is that, and it's by no means widespread, but it is growing, is that the number of, farmers, you know, I guess I'm middle aged now. God, I'm 40 something or other. So, people who are my age who are taking over from the dad and saying like, hey, we need another way. So these guys are already farming, they've already got acreage, they've already got experience, and they're saying, hey, we're not making money. We can't do it like dad did. We can't do it like granddad did. Something ain't working. And so they are the ones who are actively in agriculture, and they are adopting all of these cool practices. That there is a no-till farming association of Nebraska or something like that. I don't know, but just the fact that there are enough people in the heart of farming country to actually create an organization about no-till farming, which is, that's out there. That's not a conventional thing at all. And
Right.
so I think that they're doing it not because they're eco hippie crunchy granola heads. They're doing it because like, hey, I need to keep the farm. Like, we need to make money. Like, yeah, there's definitely a sense of doing things right, but they would, you know, the dollar talks at the end of the day. And so they're getting into this because they're seeing more profitability. So no-till no-till cropping, for instance, that means that you're not disking up your field to plant your next crop into. Well, I'm not a farmer. I can't give you the right statistics, but you're probably reducing your passes across that field by three, four, something like that. You're probably saving, I don't know, 30, $40 an acre. You know, if you're farming 1,000 acres, like $40 an acre, it's $40,000 we just kept in our pocket, you know? And so they might not be the highest producing outfit, but they might be the most profitable outfit, right? So their overall volume goes down a little, production goes down a little bit, but their costs go down a lot. So, they're coming out ahead. And that, they can, by having a greater margin on their production, they can farm less acres, they can take more care of the acres they do have. There's a saying, the best fertilizer is the footstep of the farmers. And so, if you have 1,000 acres, you can put more footsteps on something than if you're farming 10,000 acres. 10,000 acres of farmland is bonkers. Our whole ranch is 4,000 acres. We're pretty small, really. I realize that's a big number, but we're small in the ranching community. So that means, and we can't drive a tractor on our 4,000 acres. So that means someone has a flat enough piece of ground, 10,000 acres, that they can drive a tractor across every square foot of that. It's mind boggling. There's no way you can take
That
care of
is.
that much land, right? You got to bring it back to human scale. They can farm it, obviously, but to really get the benefit of the farmer's footsteps, 10,000 acres is bonkers. So
It is bonkers. Yeah.
bringing it down to human scale and being able to, and that's a crushing responsibility. When you're harvesting those sort of crops, you have tiny windows. You're talking like 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks. I mean, it's not very much. Imagine trying to drive your tractor across 6 or 10,000 acres in 6 weeks, or your crop gets spoiled and you don't make any money. Right. And then now I'm just on a
Yeah.
tangent. And then the tractors you have to do that sort of processing, you're talking like millions of dollars worth of equipment that you run for 4 or 5 weeks out of the year. Then you put them in your $1 million barn to keep them, ready for next year. I don't want to be a farmer. Those
Yeah.
guys, that's nuts. That's high stress there, if you ask me.
Yeah, so I think all of that's fascinating. And I like that where you started was just that steep learning curve. So for somebody who's in an urban environment who may have this idyllic idea of, hey, I want to return to the land, I want to start a small farm. If they don't have that history, you called it that oral history, it's going to be tough, right? I mean, there's just no way around it. It is, it can't, not to say it can't be done, but it's just kind of these legacy folks, the folks left on farm, which there's, I mean, every generation there's fewer and fewer farmers, right? You're an exception. You were born on the farm and you're still there. But I love the way that you turn that around and say, well, so there's this new generation of farmers now, and we're looking at things a little bit differently. Yeah, we want to do the right thing, but we also want to be fiscally responsible. We want to hang on to this property that's been, in our family for generations. And if we keep doing what's always been done, it's just not feasible. We can't compete with the guy with 40,000 acres, right? We got to do things a little bit differently. So, Tyler, as we're wrapping up here, what's next for you? What's on the horizon out there on your ranch?
All sorts of cool stuff. I mean, we are in the midst of launching or improving, exploding our direct to consumer sales. So, we're really trying to create that connection from people to the land. So, we're ramping up a newsletter and, I don't know, very minimally social media, Facebook page, trying to get people connected to what we do, get people out to the ranch, all that sort of good stuff. So we're bigbluffranch.com, if I can name drop a little bit right there.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
so that's really our big thing right now, is just get people aware of what we're doing and why we're doing it and why it's so cool. And we're just going to keep doing all of the cool stuff that we can do. So, in fact, my dad's finishing lunch right now. He's about to head off and go spread some compost. So we compost our manure from our chickens, our own, we're pretty small scale, compost our own on-farm chicken compost, and he's going to go spread it out on the rangeland. So basically imagine fertilizing rangeland. So that's all sorts of cool stuff that another podcast. You can have me back. We'll get way into like cool stuff like that. So we're doing that. We're experimenting with some cover crops on rangeland. We're experimenting with, well, we're not really experimenting. Now we're going whole hog on our no corn, no soy chicken, which has got all sorts of interesting health benefits for both the birds, the land, and for people. So we're pretty excited about that. And yeah, I mean, basically, you need to go to our website, get on my newsletter, and keep up with me, because that's the only way I know what's going on. Is like, I gotta tell people what's going on this week. What's going on this week? I don't know. Let's tell them in the newsletter.
Fantastic. All right, and folks, that was bigbluffranch.com. Is that right, Tyler?
That is us.
Yep. All right, so make sure you guys go there. Now, is there other ways that people can connect with you? You mentioned maybe making a foray into the social media space here.
Right. So we are on Facebook. Big Bluff Ranch 1, I think we are on Facebook. And I actually, my social media vice, believe it or not, is LinkedIn. You can just find me on LinkedIn, Tyler Dawley on LinkedIn. I'm the guy with the chicken on my hat. Now you have to go look, right? You're like, what does he mean a chicken on his hat? Well, there you go.
Chicken on his hat.
Now you have a reason to go look for me. And that's about it. If I go any deeper into the social media addiction, it would be bad news, man. It gets me.
Right on. Yeah, you got other things to do out there on the ranch.
Right.
So folks listening, I'll drop all of that contact information, the website, all of that in the show notes. You can find that there. Tyler, I want to thank you so much for coming on the show today and sharing your passion, your wisdom, your knowledge with us, and certainly encourage you to keep up the great work. I think that we all need more of what you're doing with your passion, your drive, and encourage you just to keep up the great work, man.
Okay. Well, I appreciate it. I had a lot of fun chatting, and yeah, any of your listeners have questions, just reach out. I don't know if you could tell, but I love talking about this stuff. So any questions, just get a hold of me. Let's chat it out. Let's have fun.
Okay, folks, that's our show for this week. If you've enjoyed this podcast, I want to let you know that we have other free resources over at silveredgefree.com. There you'll find our free guides with our top tips on nutrition, exercise, and healthy lifestyle, as well as a couple of new assessments. So feel free to head over there and download anything that looks useful to you and your health and wellness journey. I also want to let you know that you can find all the links to the resources we discussed in this episode over at silveredgefitness.com/episode 149, and you can continue the conversation over there as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts and comments on today's show. I really appreciate you spending your time with me today, and until next time, stay strong.